Hello, lovely people. I'm Alex White, and you're listening to Raven Radio. Voices from beyond the default world. This podcast explores conversations with curious characters from outside the normal realms of culture.
Let's play.
Let's dive into today's episode. Enjoy. Hi James, lovely to have you here with us today. Pity it can't be in person, but I am glad we're able to connect anyway. As you may know, my intention with this podcast, Raven Radio, is to collect conversations with people from outside the default world, and you were certainly my gateway drug into the alternative worlds of movement and plant medicines about 10 years ago. I'm also collecting these conversations for my daughter, Phoenix, that you know, who still holds the elephant that you gave her as her main comfort animal. And although she's getting bigger these days, my current project is to gather and then hand over these interviews to her on her 13th birthday. And I'm certainly glad that your voice can be one of those that are whispering in her ear. So let's not go into your bio or resume today. That's kind of boring. Let's just dive straight in, shall we? How would you like to begin? What have you got for us today?
Should I begin this rant? No, it's not a rant. It's a download. I'm going to be downloading you from my higher self through my crown chakra. Dynamic movement therapy. Or should I talk about myself? Which kind of talks about, like when I talk about myself, if I talk about how I came to stumble upon this kind of formula, I talk about myself through that. I checked out the other videos, and my beard it takes up a lot of fucking space in the screen. It's huge. I fucking love it. I don't want to get rid of it. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely don't get rid of your beard. I actually think I might need to join you there and lose some of my hair along with you. Tell us more about this dynamic movement therapy, DMT. What's the actual structure of it? What does it actually do?
The overarching umbrella of the dynamic movement therapy system is nature. DMT, the neurotransmitter, permeates through the entire natural world, animals, plants, humans. So it seems fitting to call the system that. But it's what holds breath, movement, and flow together as this theme that weaves through all of them. The most profound therapeutic experiences I've had through my life have been not with a therapist, but have been when I've been out in the wild, when I've been in nature with a mountain, with a river, and that their presence, their safety, their nurturing just allows my nervous system to relax and just release whatever tension, however old it is, and just decompose as fertilizer to give birth to some more functional and optimal behaviors. But there's a functional way to work with, or there's a specific way that the DMT system teaches, which is working with the different realms, animals, plants, and minerals, and learning how they interact with the nervous system and all the connective tissue to stimulate a neuroplastic atmosphere so the nervous system is more malleable. So it deepens awareness, or heightens awareness, and accelerates recovery, and just allows us to accelerate our evolution.
Okay, so I really appreciate that description, and obviously these things are fairly ineffable. Is there a way that you can actually show us what the DMT experience looks like? Can you share some videos with us?
So this is like a 10-minute version of the DMT protocol. I will release a video with a 20-minute version, a 40-minute version, and then an hour version, and then maybe an hour and a half, just to show you how the same exercises can be done with different texture and intensity and quality and context, and it creates either a kind of subtle sensitizing exercise movement, or flexibility or strength, or uh, yeah, it's like balance, coordination, like you can play with them. But to start off with, if you're not doing this outside, I would suggest getting like three little cups or two little cups, filling one with sand or dirt, filling one with water, getting a candle, and then having a feather. And I have them in front of me if I ever do it inside, as a way of just like still sensing and giving my attention to the different elements. It's really easy to do it outside. I do it by a lake. So it's like those elements are constantly in my face, and I don't even need to try and think about them. The other thing is also to be aware of where the directions are. So where is east, where is north, where is south, where is west, and it doesn't have to be like a shamanic type calling in the directions. Just like literally, like, be aware of where the sun rises and sets, and know which directions are where. So you're orientating these, like those, you're reinstalling a relationship with those directions in the body, real time. So I'm not going to do much talking with this. I'm just going to do the movements, and I feel like in the later ones, I will explain. And then I would, like, immediately after that, completely lay down, close your eyes, and just scan your body. I'll put another video up with a very simple map of things that I do to reinstall, like different senses that I reinstall back into my awareness after I was doing an exercise session like that.
Yeah, thanks for showing us through that. And, obviously you're out of breath. It's quite a strenuous, full spectrum movement practice, and have really enjoyed installing that in my own body. Can you tell us more about flow and your thoughts on it? Lots of people throw the word around these days. What do you think about it?
Flow is basically an optimal state of consciousness. It's a state in which we feel, think, and perform our best. The beer and the dual merge, and there's this presence and intense focus where we feel a connection to ourself, the natural world, and the task at hand, where magic happens, where it's kind of like near perfect decision making. Yeah. And it used to be thought of as a kind of like a magic pill. Like some people had it, some people don't. Whereas now, with a lot of the brain imaging technology and development of science, they can see that they're bringing it down to biology, to what's happening in the brain, neurochemistry, neuroelectricity, and neuroanatomy, and they've created this map that allows people to see where they are in this cycle and kind of reverse engineer the process to drop into that space. It can't be forced. It's about kind of like creating an environment that allows us to back into it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Speaking of things that can't be forced, there's a lot of new breathwork modalities around, and for my part, it seems like a lot of them are manufactured and fairly forced. What are your thoughts on breath?
Breath is it's the elixir of life. It's not even a metaphor. That's literally what it is. Like, you change your breath and you change your life. You change the direction you're going in. You change what enters and exits your reality. It's interesting having conversations with people that are focused on their health, and they invest so much energy into their nutrition, and like people having really poor quality breath it's like you can't extract the nutrients of the organic and high quality food that you're eating. So from my observation and my opinion, it's the primary process of the primary way of bringing health and neutralizing the pH in the body. And there's a whole bunch of science that supports that. So yeah, teaching people different breath practices to achieve different states is a key component to DMT, because it accelerates recovery. It releases emotional trauma. It does a lot of things. Like, the list is endless.
Breath is the foundation of life. And I'm sure a lot of you guys out there, you invest a lot into the nutrition, what you put into your body. And I've noticed this, like, I have conversations with like, I don't really care what your diet is, but I know a lot of people are very conscious of that. And I've had conversations with vegans and dietitians and whatever, but I can see them, like, I can feel and see it in their own chest or their own torso, that they're not even breathing into the diaphragm. They're breathing into their chest the entire time, and it's shallow, and it's like the amount of energy that's invested into compared to, like, into their breath is just poor. And so the amount of oxygen they get from breath is also poor. And it's like they invest so much time into their food, which is a very important way of bringing balance to the pH, like alkalining our body's ecosystem. But in my opinion, it's secondary, and it's the primary way of bringing balance to pH is breath. And so if you've got poor breath and very little oxygen in the body, because you're just breathing into the chest instead of the diaphragm and filling up every cell, you're not able to actually extract the nutrients from the food that you're eating. So it's almost like it just washes through your body. And so you can have really good quality organic food, but the same applies in agriculture. It's like if you can add fertilizers, but if the soil isn't oxygenated, the nutrients just wash through the soil. Yeah, so the first breath practice that I do when I wake up it's called box breathing. You can download the app. The voice is slightly annoying. You can turn it off, so it just kind of like says breathe in, hold, breathe out, hold. And you can basically customize your own kind of level. Now I do this every morning. This is pretty much I'm not going to say every morning, 90% of the time, 95% of the time. I'll wake up and I'll do a 10-minute practice of, like, for me, it's like 11 or 12 seconds, where I'm breathing in, holding, breathing out, holding, and it guides me through that, so I can just focus on my breath and not have to kind of use my mental thing. It's like I'm giving my monkey mind balls to juggle so that it doesn't throw fruit at me. And the box breathing is used by martial artists, military, and it's basically it's a way of it's, for me, the breath is a metaphor of how I live, and so I want to have a balance of inputs and output. But it's also, I use that time. It'll vary for everyone, where like it might be the hold on the in breath or the out breath, but you will have a stress response. Your amygdala will produce cortisol and some other stress hormones, saying, and that's its way of saying breathe. Like it's like an alarm. Yeah. Most people, if they're lucky, have their amygdala as a co-pilot. Actually, some people have it as a co-pilot. Most people have it as their main pilot. And I use this breath as a way of basically training my nervous system to just say, not shut the fuck up, but like treat it as a monitor of my whole system self. So instead of like having it as like an alarm that says like stress, and so you breathe, you're like, whoa, chill. Thanks for the information, Mr. Monitor of my amygdala. But I'm going to, I'm doing this exercise, and I know that I'm not going to die if I hold my breath for another 5 seconds. And so I'm training myself to just, communicate with it and understand how it communicates with me, but not react to it. So there's a lot in there as the box breathing, which is why it's the first thing that I do. Highly recommend that. The second practice that I do, again, like 80% of the time, but it's not every day, is the Wim Hof method that Dane put up a podcast on earlier. We talked about this 2.5 years ago. I practiced it. I became aware of it 2 weeks after a week after I separated from my ex-wife, which was a really fucking heavy, difficult time. Shame, guilt, judgment, self-doubt, and whatever, and the opinions of other people, what they thought of me, being a failure. And I found this article on Wim Hof in this kind of like pseudo-scientific journal, or kind of like publication called Wake Up World, and I think a lot of their articles are full of shit, but that one stood out, and so I started practicing it and just released, like vibrated out a lot of stress, a lot of hormones, just like basically heavy emotions, and I bumped out of that, like I bumped through that process like in a month, which maybe a bit longer, but it definitely helped me move through the heaviness of that time, and transition into the next phase of my life instead of like hanging around there too long. And so, I teach that. You can download that, just like type in Wim Hof method, and it's just a non-dogmatic way of consciously breathing. And basically he talks about the science of how it allows you to hack into the autonomic processes of the body, the immune system, and basically produce a whole bunch of neurochemicals to get, like, not to get high, but they're all performance enhancing neurochemicals. I'll explain that a bit more in the movement stuff. Hopefully that's enough. Yeah. Basically, I would say invest daily into some breath practice. The box breathing is the most effective one. If you guys want to kind of like PM me, I can, whatever, or if there's more questions, I can answer them, but hopefully this is enough. Ideally with the Wim Hof stuff, you also have cold showers. But yeah, just breathe. Basically, and once a month I do hyperbaric chamber, which is oxygen therapy. Like I'm basically just breathing in straight oxygen in a high pressurized chamber. And when I've been dealing with some heavy fucking challenges in my life, that it's like when I'm breathing in that space, it's almost like it's opening up a satellite connection with my fucking higher self. Like the insights that I have of experiences that I'm going through that just seemed really confusing. It's like it just activates this higher intelligence. But that's like you don't need to do that. But just like basically breathe into your diaphragm. Yeah, like please.
Yeah, once again, that sounds like a bit of a PSA. It's like just breathe into your diaphragm. God damn it, I can really feel how heartfelt you are in trying to convey how important that is. So let's try and focus on that. In terms of altered states and things like that, I've heard you've done some darkroom practice before, or at least some days with the Mindfold eye mask. Why were you doing that?
Why was I doing it? I was doing it because I had a hypothesis, understanding the way neuroplasticity works, and how if you use particular body parts, that more blood flow and neural connections would go to those the representations of those body parts in the brain. And so I feel like that applies to not just our body parts, but our senses as well. And so I felt like if I eliminated the my sense of sight, that it would shuttle energy and attention to my other senses, my sense of hearing, my sense of taste and smell. But because humans, of all the mammals, we're probably the most visual mammals on the planet. Most other mammals rely on the sense of smell, but it was mainly my sense of like what I used to think was that what I understood was that the organ was the skin was the largest organ of, or it's our organ of awareness. But what I've read recently was that the fascia is the largest sensory organ of the body, responsible for proprioception and our awareness of our body in space. Um, and so I felt like by eliminating my sense of sight, that I would train my skin to, because in a way it perceives light and smells, because there are all these bacteria that aren't just picking up the spectrum of light that we see, but where they're picking up the almost, I don't want to say the entire spectrum of light, but I feel like I feel like they perceive more of light than we do with our eyes, or a different one. But yeah, it was supposed to be a 3-day experiment, but my housemate wasn't here yesterday, and like my plan was to like do my meditation or meditations, because I have a variety of things which I'll probably get into in the next kind of few videos. Play Didj, do the different textures of exercises, because not all movements and exercises are created equally. That's probably another video I'll do. But yeah, I did them, and it was just nice to kind of experience myself in this void space, to really begin to feel more of my body. Like I feel it pretty detailed, but just ways to explore it even more. But then I wanted to go outside, because I live across the road from the beach, and I wanted to jump in the ocean or go to the lake. And I ended up doing both, but it was an ordeal. Like to just the crossing the road was fine, but it was like getting out, and I could hear the waves and just almost like feel the ambience of it was an intense day to go to the beach. It was pretty wild. But then to get into the water was fine, and to just kind of like feel everything kind of like over my skin and going through my bioenergetic field. But the fuck thing was getting back. And I really had to end up just asking people. I'm like, hey, I can't see. Can you direct me back to the entrance and across the road? And then I was like, can I go to the lake? And so it's a little bit further, and I ended up going to the lake and going for a swim there, and like really just sitting in the water and taking in the whole field of that of that ecosystem. And then when I was coming back, I ended up in some bushes, and then I had to get other people to help me back. And then I walked past my house, and then I was just like, wow, I had just had such, like, at any time I could have taken this off. I didn't, but I was like, wow, some people actually are permanently like this. And it was just like, fucking, like, what courage they have to just leave the house. Like I live here and I know this whole environment, but to like go somewhere that you don't know what it looks like, and whether you're just relying on a dog or it's just like, wow, there was just huge respect for people with like any kind of disability, but blindness. And so, yeah, I'm having to kind of cut this short, but I also feel like doing this at some point, I will be doing this at a point in the future. I feel like 7 days would be ideal. 3 days, I think, like I definitely felt an increase in sensitivity to my skin and my other senses. Last night was really difficult. I don't think I actually got any sleep at all. It didn't feel like I got sleep, just to kind of be in this blind, kind of like this void darkness. I feel pretty scattered this morning. I also haven't eaten, so my intention was not to eat for the whole 3 days. I tend to fast 3 days a month. Just no food, just water. Ayurvedically, I've read, and it feels right. It feels appropriate for me in this time of my life to fast as many days as you are old a year, and so for me that's roughly like three. I'm 32, so 3 days a month is another one of my practices and rituals that I do to kind of just reset my body each month. But this was a new experiment, but I feel like I will be doing it more, and I probably may do it with either microdosing on one day or some psychedelic. I feel like will amplify the ability to like reshuttle my energy towards different senses.
Yeah, I really love your commitment there to wearing the eye mask multiple days. I haven't done that myself for multiple days, but I think I'll give it a go. I'm also building a dark room down at Venus Bay, so hopefully you can join me there. We'll give that a bit of a go. I like the microdosing edition as well. I think, if you're going to shake the snow globe with microdosing, you might as well put on a eye mask and really go inside. Sometimes I'm a little bit skeptical about that, and I think it's really nice to engage with the world around you, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more as we go on here. Well, let's leave that for later. For the moment, I'm going to ask you this really fundamental question. It's a bit simple, but why is movement even important? Like, why should we care?
For those of you that like movement is the largest dogma when it comes to the way the body operates. Yoga would be some people's dogma. 5 rhythms might be some people's dogma. Martial arts, BJJ might be their dogma. They're all dogmas. Just movement is the one that encapsulates all of them, and the reason why I call my business dynamic movement therapy is because it's one of the most important ways of it's like the brain, 50% of the brain is dedicated to motor patterns. Yeah. And the way the brain operates is in these overlaying patterns. And so when you move the body, these maps in the brain basically become stimulated. Now, the other maps, the interoceptive maps of all the autonomic processes, the somatosensory, so the feeling and sensations, they're all overlaid on top of this initial motor map. So by moving the body, basically you're stimulating the neuroplastic atmosphere of the brain to kind of make change, basically. The spiral stuff works at creating a neuroplastic atmosphere by kind of like scrambling everything. Movement is another way. The thing is, it's like, and I recommend, his name's Dr. John Ratey. He's written a book called Spark and a few other things. I think he's got a TED Talk called The Importance of Exercise. And he did a whole bunch of studies or experiments in the US that basically took this school from a very low average to like being the top 3 on the planet. and it was basically incorporating exercise into their into their study periods. And some of the experiments that he like, basically they would give them these kids tests, and some of them they would get an extra study period where they were allowed to study with the things that they were studying, and then others were given a period, the same amount of time to exercise. Time and time again, the kids that exercise got 10% better marks than the kids that didn't exercise and got time to study about over their own whatever. Now he worked out like that's just kind of cardio exercise, but he worked out that it was complex patterns. Not just kind of going for a run is good, but it's like if you have complexity in the exercise with cardio, then it's even better. And what's being produced is like dopamine, anandamide, serotonin. These are all neurochemicals, performance-enhancing neurochemicals that make connections in the brain. The other thing was this brain BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is basically it's a glue. It's a glue that when you exercise, your brain produces this stuff so that all the floating data that you've got in the brain and also in the nervous system basically has this binding thing that kind of puts it into long-term storage. Into it glues things together. So there's like, yeah, I encourage get out there and do any kind of movement practice. Like that's another thing. Like daily invest into some practice of movement where you're learning something. Where you're like a teacher of mine, Ido Portal, talks about like zone 1, zone 2, zone 3 practices. Zone 1 is where you're first being exposed to the skill and you're learning it. The second one is when you've developed and you like, the first one is like you kind of shit at it, but you're going from this process of like impossible to just trying to make it possible. Feldenkrais talks about this as well. The stages of development: impossible to possible, possible or difficult to easy, and then easy to pleasant. And then looking for new things that are impossible to get. So it's like, the thing is like most people, they just like personal training and fitness and whatever is a zone 3 thing where you've already kind of like got some level of mastery of it and it's maintaining, and there's no real brain developmental benefits of that. There's like physical benefits, but there's not brain development stuff. The learning new skills, you want to have all 3. Like I've got things where I'm maintained at, I wouldn't say at a mastery level, but highly proficient, and I'm constantly maintaining that. I've got things that I'm learning that I'm constantly exposing myself to, and then things in zone 2 where it's like it's now becoming functional and there's huge amount of progress that I see. Like the main things that I've got are balancing, handstands, I do juggling, fire twirling, salsa, rock climbing. They're all, so I have things that I'm constantly exposing my brain to learning, and that's basically what we need to integrate. Like we need things when we're having these, we're clearing something or whatever it is. It's like we need to have things that take our mind off the problem and just let our nervous system completely not think about it, and be highly stimulated. So yeah, movement. I find like the stuff that I teach is based on a lot of things, but it's spirals. Like I teach people the fundamentals of circles and then how to link them together to basically make spirals through the body to kind of squeeze or ring if our body is basically spirals. And check out Simon Thakur's ancestral movement stuff. He's put a link up on this recently. But basically the way the muscles and the fascia and all the adipose tissue and nerves, they're all basically spirals. So like spiraling the spirals is like wringing the cloth of our body, which squeezes out these, it's basically squeezing out the stress hormones as well as making connections in the brain to basically integrate the data into patterns. Yep.
Yeah, it really does seem that there's something about this spiraling in the body. I've been doing a fair bit of it lately with contact improv, and my body wasn't really used to it. But once you start moving in those spirals or doing the spinal twists, yeah, things start really loosening up. You feel far more fluid in the body. So thank you for pointing to that, and definitely something for us to focus on. Are there any ways that you move that are unusual? Like, how do you go about ensuring you're like fully alive during movement rather than just ticking the box?
I've always been a strong advocate of nudity as a medicine and a nutrient and or just a way of nourishing the kind of primal, wild human being that we are that is being dangerously domesticated. And so, yeah, I try to incorporate it as much as possible into my lifestyle at home. When I go out, when I go on bushwalks, when I go for bushwalks, I tend to try to go to places that aren't popular, and I think I've mentioned this in a previous video, where I will basically just do my walk naked or go for a run, and just the level of sensitivity and awareness and perception of my own physical body, but also my environment and the way I'm relating with it enhances. But what I've also recently discovered is because I live opposite the beach, and so what I've been doing is going for naked runs at night on the beach. No lights, no phone. I mean, I've got it here because I'm doing this talk, but I will run for 20 minutes or half an hour, and just really at nighttime, when you can see the stars, like you really see how big the sky is. Especially on a beach, it's like there's this vast openness that's huge. But then not just to take it in with my eyes, but to take it in with my entire skin. Like that organ is our organ of awareness. But it's like, and for some reason, the moment you like clothe up, like just put on underwear, it blunts and like numbs and hinders the ability of the amount of sensory information that you perceive. Like the moment you take them off, it's just like for me, I get this like panoramic awareness behind me, around me, up, and it's like I can feel everything. And whether it's just because I'm exposed and I'm like needing to like, it's interesting the origin, the Greek, ancient Greek definition of gymnos, which is where gyms, the idea of the name of the gym comes from, which is a place where people exercise. A lot of people think that it was a place of exercise, but the translation is actually a place of nakedness, a place of, but not nakedness with clothes, or it was that, but a place of nakedness in the sense of being vulnerable. And it was a place where they trained exposing their fears and relating with them and overcoming them. And it's just interesting that this is what gyms have become. So yeah, basically try to incorporate nakedness into your life as much as possible. It's important.
Yeah, once again, an amazing tip, or not really a tip, more of a way of life, is to be naked as much as possible. So thank you once again. And you've mentioned ancestral movement or animal movement a little bit. Do you have any practical examples of what that really looks like?
Hey, do you want to stay here?
Yeah, that seems fairly out there, especially on a public beach. But Is that as weird as you get? Yeah, okay. I guess that's a good answer to that question. That's pretty out there. I'm glad you were able to really feel into your inner walrus there with Paul. Lovely to see you both. Let's get back into the body. How do you think about the body, like the energy centers? What's your summary? How can you explain that?
So to do that, I'm going to briefly explain. I think most people in my feed know what chakras are. If you don't, Google it. Or actually, I'll put up a post because there's some kind of like shit information out there, and I'll put up something that kind of summarizes it quite. Just keep it simple. But for this thing, we have 7 kind of chakras. The first one is down at the root, like between the perineum. The second one is the sacral, which is the lower emotional. The solar plexus down there is the lower mental. The heart is a bridge. The throat is the higher physical of the root chakra. The third eye is the higher emotional of the sacral, and then the crown up here is the higher mental of the solar plexus. So understanding those, and I just kind of like before I get onto the tree section, just a lot of people in the new agey kind of pseudo-spiritual kind of thing tend to just want to like open up these higher centers without actually really doing the work and developing the foundations down here. If you do the foundations down at the lower physical, the lower mental, and the lower emotional, these things have a base of foundation to bloom and open without without just any kind of psychic spiritual injuries potentially happening. So in relation to a tree, the obvious thing would be that the root chakra of a tree would be its roots. Its solar plexus would be its trunk. So its lower emotional is its trunk. The lower mental or its solar plexus is its branches. Its heart is the bark. So that's where its spirit and its heart exists. The throat, as I mentioned yesterday, is the leaves or phyllodes in certain species. And then the third eye is its flowers. So its higher emotional is its flowers, and then the seeds and the fruits are its higher mental or its solar plexus. So understanding that shared anatomy will assist in opening up a dialogue and a communication, both to communicate with it, but also to receive its message. But I feel also understanding that it operates in a different spectrum of time. So if you want to hear a message from it, either you need to expand your understanding of time out, or you need to ask it to compress its message to deliver it in a way that it's in your, how do I explain this? In like your blah blah blah, like a compressed time, so the opposite of expanding.
yeah, that I kind of feel like, is that 3 minutes? Someone give me. They should really put a timer on these Facebook lives. What else can I say? Oh, I just want to kind of give credit to my teacher Justin Assar of the liquid crystals, and part of this information. I learned some of this stuff from trees and my training in Peru with different shamanic plants, but it was verified and kind of synthesized in a very beautiful way, which is one of his gifts. And that was a course I did recently called the Liquid Trees. If you want to know more about that, there's one in Sydney and Melbourne coming up. But I may share some more information that I learnt recently in my next video. Has that been 3 minutes? What else to say? I think that's enough for now. Why is this actually relevant? Because, you know what? Most of us are disconnected to our landscape and don't know how to communicate with it, or both speak to it or hear it. And so I feel like these practices that I may be sharing just make life more enchanting and magical, and actually I kind of feel like that's what human beings like, not feeling separate from the ecosystem and landscape.
Yeah, thanks for taking us through all of that. I think that final note there on feeling separate from anything is something that we can move away from. And if any conversation I'm having that seems fairly separatist or creating a dichotomy or a binary conversation, it's like, well, no, it can be all the things. It's a full spectrum expression of who you are as a human, and more to the point, where you are in environment and as part of nature. So really lovely to hear your thoughts on that. Let's move to another fairly well-covered topic, I think these days anyway, with books such as, there is a book now called Sleep. I'd like to know more about what your sleep practices are.
Yeah, treating sleep as a practice. What I mean by as a practice is something that you get progressively better at, instead of just like passing out. Treating it like, for me, I go to bed, it's like I make love to my sleep. I treat it as this like romantic relationship that I have with my bed and that time, because I know how fucking important it is for everything else. Like, there's shitloads of research now that it's like, so we're not learning things when we're doing them. That's when we're accumulating the data. It's when we're not doing them that we're actually integrating that data. One of the most effective ways is sleeping and having like, you want to be getting to delta REM sleep. Like, delta is the brainwave pattern that you want to be having in the sleep cycle, and you want to be having consistent kind of like REM stuff. And if you listen to, like Dane said this countless times, but that which we measure, I forget whatever it is, that which we measure gets better. Yep, I think. And most people don't know how to measure their sleep. There is an app that you can download called Sleep Cycle, where you kind of like turn it on, you put your phone on flight mode, and you rest the phone next to your bed or under, like on your bed somewhere, and it measures the movements of your body over the night, and also the sounds you make, and it basically produces this graph that then you wake up in the morning and you see where in your cycle or how effective your sleep was. Just having that awareness will improve the quality of sleep you have. If your sleep is already effective, you won't really notice much of a difference. But if it's shit, you will notice your sleep get better just through being aware of the patterns of your sleep. Yeah, so it's ideally it's in the delta REM sleep that we amalgamate, or we're more effective at basically learning the stuff that we've done. Yeah, we don't learn the stuff when we're doing it. We learn it when we're sleeping. Another thing that is really helpful is like getting some plants into your bedroom so that your room is oxygenated. Your bed sheets, your paint on the wall, carpet, they're all releasing these like shitty fucking petrochemicals. It's just like constantly breaking down. And if you haven't got living plants, there are some plants that are better than others, and I'll tell you what they are in a second, to basically eat the shit that our stuff is releasing. Like, I'm not sure if you guys have ever like gotten really high on taking something. I have. I'm not gonna that actually might be another, you know what, I'm gonna talk about that as well afterwards. But it's like, in these experiences, I'm like, I see, as I'm moving my hand, like I see the debris of my cells. Like, if you guys don't know, the dust in your house is basically your dead skin cells. Like, we're constantly breaking down consistently. Like, that's in our sleep, it's in our during the day. And if we haven't got living things to, like, the plants are really good at just fucking kind of consuming that. The best plant to have in your bedroom is a perennial snake plant, or it's also known as mother-in-law's tongue. It's the only plant in the vegetal kingdom that produces oxygen at nighttime. Every other plant releases carbon dioxide. It's the only plant that releases oxygen. So as you're sleeping, it's producing oxygen, which will enhance your sleep. And it also feeds off other shit as well. So having that, and yeah, like treating sleep as it's like, sleep is not doing anything. Sleeping is actually, it's like, if you really want to invest in personal development, then sleep more, basically, is my opinion. The other thing, this might push some buttons, is drugs. When I say drugs, I'm talking about like entheogenic, shamanic kind of like plants that every indigenous culture on this planet has consumed. They've consumed it as a food, because it's a plant that produces these neurotransmitters that are designed specifically to fit into the receptors of our brain. Like, listen to this. They're produced in trees that plug into the little trees in our brain, like our receptor sites. If you look at kind of like really high-powered photographs of our brain, these receptor sites, and we have several kind of systems: the serotonin, norepinephrine, and then the third one, which hardly gets stimulated. But it's like they look like trees without, they actually have leaves. And usually, if we're deprived of particular neuro or nutrients, then the trees lose their leaves, and then it's difficult to kind of like, it's almost like antidepressants that get burnt out. Like the leaves on the receptor sites get burnt out, and basically it makes it harder to kind of like receive the neurochemicals that we're producing, which mainly get produced in our gut. And they're actually, to produce them endogenously, they're very expensive, meaning that we need a lot of energy, a lot of sunlight, a lot of fresh air, a lot of good food, and a lot of good quality water. They're the 4 elements, yeah? So it's like sunlight, clean air, oxygenated habitat, but actually quality breath, living water, like spring water, not tap liquids, because the shit that comes out of your tap is not fucking water. It's dead. And that's the stuff that you're putting into your body. Your body's made up of like 90% liquid. You want it to be good quality water. And then did I say food? So food is earth. They're the 4 elements. Drugs, not all drugs, but it's like psilocybin mushrooms, dimethyltryptamine, mescaline, They're basically, they make connections in the brain. The reason they're highly effective for drug addiction is because drug addicts take drugs because they want to feel connected. They don't feel connected because of trauma that's usually happened in their life. And so those drugs they take make connections. These other psychedelic shamanic drugs, they fix those addictive patterns because they make connections in the brain that then will allow you, once you've got connections in the brain, you feel connected to your body, which will then make you feel connected to your community and then your environment. So yeah, taking them in a ritual ceremonial context are powerful ways of basically developing the brain and the nervous system. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for covering those topics there. I think, obviously sleep super important. We started to delve into the areas of psychedelics and other ways to help the nervous system, help the brain. Let's move beyond the brain for a second here and talk about our digestion in the gut, or maybe a part of the brain, but lower in our body. How do you nourish yourself, and what do you do when you're fasting, and where do you go when you fast?
Like we digest more of life through our skin than we do through our digestive system. And so I've been lathering myself with coconut oil, which is kind of rich in a whole bunch of phytochemicals and antifungal and antibacterial and just really cool. So I've been kind of walking around this bush, an oiled up, hairy, feral, furry mammal, and reptile and a few other things. And I've also been, so I've been nourishing it with that and also really high quality breath. I've been playing Didj and just doing a lot of breath work. And I think that's primary to balancing the pH of our internal ecosystem so that can then break down the foods that we eat properly. And then movement. I've been kind of nourishing my body with different, like I'm not going to do a high intensity gymnastics, plyometric, kind of like body calisthenics type thing that I could train. I'm just going to do some like Tai Chi, some Qigong, some gentle kind of mindful meditative practices that are still kind of nourishing my body, which is kind of what I teach and what I think why I'm doing this. As in, I don't want to be an internet sensation. I do want to get this message out. The message I'm going to probably unpack in another video thing because I'm going to try to cap these to 5 minutes, and the message is like takes me an entire weekend to break it down in the workshop that I've been teaching. I can do it in a few hours, but I'm going to have to probably try to condense it down into I'm going to need to do it maybe in two. But that's basically what I'm teaching. I'm teaching people how to nourish their body. And movement is just the front because it's the most accessible and people like it's really the most effective. But there's a whole bunch of different modalities that I've got plugged into that. It's you to create an invincible person. You can't just do one thing. Like you need to approach it on a multidimensional level, full spectrum strategy approach to dealing, like upgrading the software as well as the hardware, but also doing the work to investigate why we're there in the first place. Otherwise, we just kind of like come back to the place we started. So yeah, I'm gonna unpack it in another thing. But why am I out here? I went on an expedition to the Philippines to visit a Filipino psychic surgeon or a sorcerer priest with practitioner Paul Kane. So check out his Facebook page. I'm not sure he's got a web page going. But yeah, kind of some deep archetypal things came up. So if you want some shifts on his world class healer, does some pretty special things. But I just kind of like came out here to just decompress after all that because I had a bit of an identity shift. I'm like before I went there, I couldn't get myself away from the business, and I was so excited about teaching. Because when I left, I was like, oh wow, who am I without that? And so that's basically what I'm trying to get down to the bottom of.
Yeah, amazing to see actually where you do your fasting, and not only the practical aspects of fasting, but also the why you're doing it. I think we're all going through some identity shifts of late, given the last few years, and yeah, I think stripping away everything seems to be a great idea. So thanks for the reminder. It'd be fantastic if we could all get out into nature, and we can if we prioritize that. So, look, you're a unique individual, and I'm sure you've got your own way of drinking. What's the coolest way you have of getting hydrated?
The coolest thing was that I went to pick up a friend, and there was a thunderstorm that came in, and instead of like going inside, I got the Didj out of the car and I sat by the pond and I just played. Like I stripped down, not fully naked, but I just took off most of my clothes and just got soaked. Like the droplets were juicy and huge and heavy, and I was soaked, and it felt so good to be. It's almost like a different flavor of water, different to ocean water, which has a different pH and mineral spectrum, different to the lake water that I bathe in that has the tannins, different. And it was just like, it was a drink, like a flavored drink that I hadn't had in a while. And it was intoxicating. Like I felt high afterwards. It only went for like 15 minutes, but the sunset afterwards was like, it felt like I was really tripping. Um, just whether it was the placebo of knowing how much of our, like, what was the research I read? It was like in a 3 minute shower, we drink 2 cups of water through our skin. And when I read that, I did some more research into the skin and found like just how fucking porous it is. And babies up until like infants up until the age of 2 drink half or take in half of their nutrition through the skin. And um, and then it gradually becomes less and less porous. And but still, as an adult, with drinking in a lot. And I remember being at a festival once, and I was like so dehydrated, even though I was drinking copious amounts of water. And then I hadn't had a shower for 3 days, and so I went and had a shower. And the moment I had a shower, I just felt the water just going through like into tanks in my body, like chambers that weren't being that drinking through my like it wasn't accessing. And so it just felt really really um natural. Like I feel like to some people that saw me doing that, they're just like, that's a bit weird for someone to be out in the rain purposefully. And but for me it just felt so natural. I mean, I had to like break through the patterning of it years ago when I actually had like I it started raining and it was like 30-degree temperature, and I went inside, and then I was like, what the fuck? Why am I going inside? So I stripped out and I went outside and I just drank in the rain. And so now I take as many opportunities as I can when nature presents them. And today was one of those days. And so I feel like I just feel high from the like drinking really clean spring water, and how nourished you feel compared to like drinking tap water and shit.
Yeah, I've never really thought of our skin as drinking the water it's in, and having just got out of a chlorinated pool, I am going to have to look that up a little bit more. So thanks for that, and also the importance of spring water if it's available to obviously get it. If you're only on tap water, then maybe investigate some filters. I think is a really good way to go. All of this kind of sits under the wellness industry, I guess. Is that something that you feel like you're a part of? Is that how you refer to it?
So recently, I was approached by a company, a business that I'm one of their customers, so I like them, but they asked me if I wanted to be a wellness advocate. And my response was no. And I think the reason why was, actually, I know the reason why. And it was the language that they use. Like, I don't want to be affiliated with wellness. I don't want to be affiliated with well-being. I think language is very powerful in how we create our reality. And I don't want to be promoting wellness or well-being. I think there's far more functional and healthier qualities to connect with than being well. I think if someone asked you how's your relationship going, and you're like, it's well. Like, well is not fucking awesome. Well is well. And for those of my students that have trained with me, or those that are curious about what I teach, I'm not treating or teaching wellness. I'm teaching kind of like ultimate human performance, which is, in my opinion, basically the highest form of spirituality, when the beer and the doer merge, and there's this connection to your physical body and the environment, and just a sense of trust and connection. That's not well. That's fucking spectacular. That is awesome. And that's what I want to be an advocate of, not of wellness and well-being. And I think, just on the topic quickly, I think that also relates, like, I've had this kind of issue with the word sustainability in its relation to environmental work, or an environmental paradigm of improvement. And it's like, nature's not sustainable. Again, if someone was to ask you, how's your relationship going, and you're like, oh, it's sustainable, that is not a sign that it's healthy and it's thriving and it's abundant. So be very particular with what words you use, because they create your world and your reality. And so, yes, I'm not a wellness advocate. I'm a unbreakable, invincible, bulletproof self being. Yeah, I'm going to come up with something else, but it's definitely not well-being.
Yeah, well, maybe get back to us when you come up with something else, because, yeah, it does seem like the words we use, as you say, are super important, and the industry that we feel like we belong to really does point us in a particular direction. Let's move on. I wonder whether you feel, especially based on that conversation, whether you feel there are things missing from our culture. Like, are there certain rituals or initiations that just really aren't part of our current upbringing?
Well, initiations are supposed to, like, create a container where you relate with the things that you're most afraid of in a safe way. And she's like, I was not afraid of anything. I'm like, yes, we're all afraid of something. And she was like, and it was interesting because I was going to suggest this ritual anyway, even though I didn't know it, and it was like actually being buried in things. She's like, oh, we're both claustrophobic, and even just like having a doona over our head is like scary. And I'm like, oh yeah, you should definitely do this. And kind of, so I explained what it was that, like, cause I do this every month, like every 28 days. It's not so much a fear thing for me anymore, although it kind of a little bit was when I first did it. It's, I do it to align myself with the pulse and rhythm of the earth. Women, I feel like, have this just like built into their physiology with their 28-day cycle. And if you're a man in a relationship with a woman, you will just align to her cycle anyway, in the same way that pendulum, like a grandfather clock, the pendulums will all align to the clock that has the largest pendulum. And I feel like just because the women have the largest spectrum of kind of hormonal or emotional capacity, the men will just by nature kind of align to their cycle. But I'm not in a relationship, so my relationship's with the earth. So what do? I make love to the earth as frequently as possible. No, well, I do in a way. A variety. Maybe not. Let's just say this foreplay. There's no penetration. But what? What talking about? Okay, so one of my practices is on a new moon is I will bury myself in the earth. I will literally dig a grave, and on the beach, like a deep grave. It takes me a while, like past my knees, and I make it as clean as possible. And it's all kind of ritualistic and a ceremonial process where I'm like literally identifying with the patterns of behavior, the immature, dysfunctional patterns of behavior that have surfaced over the past 28 days. Because I'm also doing a variety of different kind of like therapeutic medicines that are aligned to this 28-day process that trigger and surface these things as a way of like re-relating with them in a healthier way. And so it's almost like an integration process where I'm like literally with my body, I'm thinking about these things as I'm digging into this grave, and I'm like not frustrated, but I'm just like trying to be as kind and compassionate as possible, regarding like, but just kind of aware that we're all kind of neurotic and half insane, even like just as mortal creatures before we're actually being programmed with some of the shitty role models and dysfunctional behaviors from individuals around us. So, I'm doing it in a kind of compassionate way, but I'm thinking of these little behaviors and I'm using them as fertilizers to give them back to the earth. And so I will literally, either with the snorkel. So if I'm doing it with a snorkel, it's usually with someone that I know, because I'm not going to do it like with a complete stranger. Although there's nothing really wrong with that. But if I'm just going to do it on my own and I'm just going to the beach and just going to pick some random person that's going to, blah, 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 that's going to bury me, because what I'm doing is I drew a mandala around it. And then when I'm finished, whoever walks past, I'm just like, hey man, or lady, can you bury me, please? And people find it really moving and touching and meaningful. Like one woman that had walked on this beach for 10 years was like, wow, this is the most meaningful walk I've ever been on. When she finished burying me and was jumping on me, and I'm like, you need a packet. So I was really tired and I feel really heavy and compressed. And it's like, so yeah, I buried maybe like 25 people now as well. And kind of fears can come up. The first time it's done, it's like, yeah, it just reminds me of being a kid. But, so yeah, I do it, and then I'll stay under there for like half an hour, breathing either through the snorkel, contemplating, being aware of like all the processes that are happening in my body. It's really easy to feel like the breath and the blood flow in your toes, like hearing your heart beating is like, it's a hack. It's like the opposite of sensory deprivation. It's like sensory fucking overwhelm. And so, yeah, that's one of the rituals that I do when as a way of like aligning myself to the earth, which then once you're aligned to the earth's pulse and the lunar cycles, then it just feeds into the kind of like the solar cycles and the pulse of the universe.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. I love that I've been able to bury myself a few times, a couple of times with you, and definitely something I have actually managed to keep doing, whether it's sort of once a quarter or certainly on some special moments in my life. And if you're under the ground, especially once the sand starts gathering up around your ears, you are certainly hearing, well, one, your heartbeat very deeply, and two, the pulse of the universe. I like that a lot. Thank you. So, speaking of the universe and deep time and all that, it's certainly getting immersed into the land. How did you start connecting with the land and specifically the elders in Australia? Are there any particular concepts that you've learnt from elders when you've been working with them?
the concept of if I teach it to you, you will not learn it. And it sounds like a bit of a Zen koan. But I didn't learn it from a Zen teacher. I learned it from it was first introduced to me by an indigenous tracker, a 98-year-old. Well, he was 98 when he died, but this was taught to me in a dream years after his death. Because I lived in the desert for a couple of years as a way of kind of like rehabbing myself from my ice addiction. And I had the privilege and honor of spending some time with this custodian and law holder and storyteller and plant keeper of their most revered trading item that I don't want to talk about. I don't want to name it on this platform, but he hadn't even taught his own kids how to make this particular plant medicine. And so when he died and I attended his funeral, it was sad. Like, even prior to really understanding what I understand these days, it felt like there was some really kind of powerful magic that had been lost. And then over the years, when I came back from the Amazon and I got to understand what that plant was that he was talking about, I asked, he visited me in a dream, in several dreams, but the first time I asked him to teach me how to process this particular medicine. And his response was, if I teach you, you won't learn it. And my understanding has evolved over the years, but what I've come to, and it may continue to evolve still, but where I'm at with it, or have been at with it for many years now, is that if he was just to have taught me this process, then I wouldn't have learned the meta skill of learning it directly from the source, from the landscape, from the plants, from the rocks, from the rivers and the mountains in the places from which he learned it. And so it feels like that understanding has flavored my my journey and quest and teachings and experiences over the years as a way of resensitizing myself, like dissolving trauma so my nervous system can relax and feel more of myself in the ecosystem. And so I can hear, so I can listen, feel, and translate what these sentient beings in our ecosystem are communicating to us. And I feel like that is the role of being a custodian in today's day and age, to hold on to, like, to make sure that the wisdom isn't lost with the elders that pass, that we have access to the land, to the library of wisdom stored there. But to do that, we need to resensitize ourselves. And so I feel like that's been the theme of my kind of like work and teachings. And sometimes I've like oversensitized myself. Can share some experiences of what not to do in another video, but finding that balance point where where I'm strong physically and I have boundaries, but I can open the gate and allow myself to merge with to empathize with certain ecospheres, but then not be overwhelmed by it, to just be what I call to be whelmed by your environment. And yeah, so this was a long video, but I feel like it's an important one, to cultivate sensitivity and to learn to decipher what the landscape is communicating to us.
Yeah, really enjoying that aspect of how can we more deeply listen to nature, and more to the point, what is it communicating back to us, as you're pointing to. Speaking of sensitivity, Is that the main benefit of all this work? Like, what's the main skill or upgrade that it gives you? Or maybe the question really is like, how do you play with sensitivity or find ways to deepen those listening skills?
I play with like a few things. Like when I go on a run, I like to set the intention of finding an item in nature where I like, whether it's a stick or a rock, which is something that I will give to someone, a stranger or a friend or whoever. And the giving of that thing to a stranger is like, has people with like receiving things, even if it's like a fucking twig, like, um, but for me, one of the cool things it does is like it's almost like stalking or tracking, and it's playing with like when I'm running, I'm playing with like this soft focus where I'm allowing my nervous system to take in as much of the environment and see as many patterns as possible. But I'm also scanning the environment floor to like find something that's glowing, and it's like driving my focus from like soft to sharp or to um, I think that's the best way to kind of put it. And that just it's a way of like playing with states. Um, and why do I do that? Because it's fun. Uh, but it's yeah, it's fun. Why other reason do you need to do something? Um, well, I'm not really hunting animals. I do when I go spearfishing, but I'm not really hunting things on the land. So that's a nice thing that I play with. Um, do I talk? Maybe let's kind of like because I put up the video yesterday about if I teach it to you, you won't learn, and it's basically it's like giving someone a being given a low hanging fruit which can deprive the the process, like deprive the gift of the process and the journey to discover that the answer for oneself is that kind of the sign of it. I think a good educator or teacher to know when to give an answer and when to just be like, kind of work that out. But yeah, kind of the skill of sensitivity and to take in the landscape and communicate with uh, sentient beings, crystals, plants, animals, and like develop that skill. That's actually a variety of skills, and being relaxed, um, being sensitive. Like for me, it's interesting because I research a lot of things about crystals and animals and plants, and so in some way it's difficult to be like, oh yeah, I'm it's an intuitive thing or it's something that I've stored away in my unconscious. And but okay, so like when I lived in the Amazon and I drank a lot of ayahuasca and I was like, even when I wasn't under the influence of it, I'd be like hearing the songs of trees and they'd be communicating to me during the day, and I'd come back to my teacher and I'd be like, so this tree was saying this to me. It's like, yeah, that's what it does medicinally. And they do say that the tea was like the way that the instructions on how to put the chikuma or psychotropin viridis with the ayahuasca to get that chemical reaction. It's like, how do they work that out? And when you speak to them, they're like, oh, the plants told us. That's like, for some people that seems a bit far out, but when you've taken those substances, that's not far out at all. That's actually really that's like legitimate, like because you have experiences like that. And yeah, I kind of feel like when I came back from South America, that was I didn't have a gate on that. Like I couldn't turn that on or turn that off, and it was dangerously. I was like overly sensitive to the point where I was merging with shit, and I couldn't stop it. And I feel like that's partly why the movement focus came into my life, and training my physical body to establish those boundaries, so that I can like consciously merge with things, and then and not, and just kind of like set up, like turn on my membrane in a way that it's like, no, that's not what I need right now. Yeah. So playing with practices or techniques of developing a level of relaxation and sensitivity for whatever reason, to be able to feel yourself, to feel your partner, to feel your family and friends, to like feel the landscape, whatever. But like is feeling with strength, like like a strong body allows me to. The stronger I get, can sometimes numb me, but if I'm like constantly playing with being relaxed and aware of my level of sensitivity, then I'm balancing. How do I? Yeah, I'm kind of balancing the level of physical strength to accommodate my expanded ability to feel.
It really does feel like that the expanded ability to feel is one of those key human skills. So thanks for pointing to some of your more interesting practices on how to develop that sensitivity, on how to play with it. And I think I'll try some of those later on this weekend. Speaking of feeling more, have you ever, and you've sort of pointed to it a little bit already, but have you ever talked to the trees or anything like that? Why do you actually talk to nature?
It's the result of a few experiences that have happened to me at various times of my life, under a variety of different altered states, from meditation to ceremony to just fasting and being in really beautiful places around the planet in nature. And the experiences that happened to me that then I have now kind of recreated as a daily practice, as consistently and as frequently as possible throughout the day, is to, well, the things that happened was I was witnessing these beautiful landscapes, whether it was a gorge or a river or just a cliff face or some tree. And there was this acknowledgement of its beauty with words, like in a state of awe, and then just like verbalizing that, and then hearing that being spoken back to me with a feeling that actually had a tone to it. Like it came out as a kind of a murmur, but it was like, it was acknowledging my beauty and my sense of service and my presence and my sense of connection to the ecosystem. And it kind of like, it just fed back, it just continued to like build. It was like, I'm not sure if you've ever transfigured with someone, just eye gazing, and perceiving them as their divine self. And it just kind of like, the energy builds. And so I had these moments happen to me. And so I kind of try to replicate that. And partly why I live by this beautiful lake is because of its, one of my teachers describes the major masculine and feminine archetypes of nature, or in nature, being that the maiden lives in the river, the lake lives in the mother lives in the lake, the crone lives in the ocean, and the warrior lives in the desert, the father lives in the forest, and the sage lives in the mountains. And so I'm living, this is a tea tree lake, so it has this very mothering energy that I feel nourished by whenever I come here, and also understanding the botanical qualities of the tea tree. And so I get to come here and really see it as a personality, like feel it as an ambience, but really tap into its ancientness, like the fact that it's been around here for a long time, and it's in a lot of things, and it's seeing me. And so a simple practice is just to like literally see the personality in the landscape that you're looking at, and perceive it. It has an awareness, like it's an ecosystem, an intelligence that's actually perceiving you. And so it's easy to start. A suggestion would be like, start off with living like a cat or a dog or an animal, and then build into a tree, and then build into like larger ecospheres, to then get to this place where you can like go to a place and like feel its perception and awareness of you. And a sense of connection to that place. I feel like that's what the practice does for me. It deepens the level of nourishment that I receive from a place, but also the quality of connection that I have to that location.
Yeah, once again, I love that you're pointing to us being a deep part of nature and that we can develop this conversation, really. It's not you going to visit this spot at some scenic lookout. It's how can you actually let the experience of nature, how can you be part of that experience? How can it shape you? How can you shape it? And developing that sense of place, especially if you start coming back to the same place often, you can really develop a connection with that. And as you're saying there, not only a connection, it's this quality. It's the quality of the connection that really helps. And I think to follow up on that, it's a practical question around how do you receive anything from nature? Like, how do you think about the way nature can teach us and the different categories of nature that are out there? How do you think about that?
So I have been trained in a variety of different like modern psychotherapeutic systems, as well as some very ancient druidic and esoteric and shamanic traditions as well. And the beautiful thing about those traditions is that they have taught me how to receive direct teachings from nature itself, which is partly what I've been kind of sharing over the past weekish, in the ways that I'm allowed to kind of share. There's some things that I don't feel like I have permission to do that, because I'm still kind of, I'm always learning and integrating things. But yeah, I feel like there needs to be a certain level of qualification, not in the sense of like I get a piece of paper, but I'm like, I have invested a certain level of time and energy and resources of myself to have a certain level of skill and understanding to feel capable, where I'm not just kind of sharing knowledge, but I'm actually sharing kind of my own personal wisdom. And I feel like you feel that. Well, I noticed that over the years, I've felt the quality of in which my words are spoken when it's coming from a place of experience and wisdom instead of just like me regurgitating shit that I've read or been told. But I do that sometimes as well because it's relevant. Anyway, so these teachings kind of divided nature up into kingdoms, which is what science has done as well. But they've divided it up into 7 kingdoms: mineral, plant, fungi, animal, and then the 3 different bacteria. The traditions that I was trained in were just divided up into 3, and animal, plants, and minerals. And that what actually, the way they function, which is very difficult to verify this kind of thing, because I think maybe science eventually may do that, but at the moment they don't really have the technology to really think. So it's just kind of, I'm going from my own experience, but my experience was also influenced by teachings. And so there are currently and still and always have been, these archetypical morphogenic templates or blueprints of information that exist on a subtle, mythical, energetic level. And that what nature does is she manifests these templates of information through her kingdoms in different expressions. So with the minerals, the mineral kingdom or the crystal kingdom, she will communicate the particular information through a stone through its journey, in the way in which it's formed and birthed into creation. So, for example, that of Larimar as a crystal, which is like born of a volcano, flies through the sky, lands in the ocean, and settles in the earth. Settles in the sand. Like you could translate that to mean like, oh, it has full, or it just has a relationship with all the elements and teaches elemental balance
and mastery. But then also because of its violent eruption, it can offer the wisdom on how to perceive, say, childhood trauma as a necessary ingredient in their life for them to exist, to be who they are. And then you have, so you can see how like through its journey, it's kind of like communicating that on an acoustic level in its song, in its inaudible song that it's singing, but also through its geometric code and its kind of vibrational frequency that it's emitting as a result of the colors that it's basically generated as it's kind of grown and formed through the earth under time and pressure and space. It's absorbed the minerals in the environment as well. So it's communicating on a variety of different levels. Then you have the plant kingdom, which is they communicate through, as I kind of shared in the previous video about the energetic comparative anatomy of a tree, like their voice is in their leaves. And so they're kind of, although they're communicating on every level, but they're the alchemists of nature. They're communicating through chemicals and hormones, which we share in common as well. So the compatibility of the mineral kingdom is that where our blood is liquid, in the sense that like when we cut ourselves, we bleed, it's liquid, but then when it solidifies, it turns into a fucking crystal. And then our fascia, which is, which Tom Myers, who wrote Anatomy Trains, he refers to our fascial network as a liquid crystal matrix. And so we have these networks in our bodies that we share in common with the mineral kingdom. And then we also have, tubes and channels in the nervous system and fascia that we share, and chemicals and hormones that we share in common with as well as the energetic anatomy that I've explained in previous videos with plants as well. And then we have the animal kingdom. Look, do I talk about a tree? Like, okay, so the tea tree is its message, or one of its messages, is letting go. And you can see, as I explained in the past, that its heart is its bark. It's interesting. I read today that cortex, the translation of cortex means bark as well. I don't know why that's relevant, but the tree is teaching us the ability to let go, and its skin and its bark is probably the easiest to, like, it just sheds itself consistently. But the deeper layers of its core are its kind of wisdom, and they stay. But the outer surface is what's kind of like allowing us to like shed out the debris of our outer skin and just cutting ties and letting things go. And then you have the animal kingdom, which is which one of my teachers, Simon Thakur, talks about in his ancestral movement kind of concept, how he's using science to reveal the kind of the comparative anatomy of most mammals on the planet and sentient beings, and how not only do we share body parts, bones, skeletons, organs that just kind of vary in size and structure, and a nervous system, but we actually can move like these creatures. And it's a practice that has been done in every traditional culture for thousands of years, but has kind of like Western people don't really do it anymore. And I believe that has a huge impact on the sense of disconnection to ourselves and the natural world, because we're not doing these ritualistic practices that allow us to feel and embody these creatures. And so kind of Simon keeps it fairly sciencey. I tend to like take things a bit woo-woo and feel like these to embody, to move like these, like you can invoke certain animal power animals, but in a prayer or whatever, but to actually mimic it and to embody it in an altered state where you actually feel its totemic kind of like wisdom and the phantom of that ancestry and that ancient power in you, because you're capable of moving like it. It allows you to like really step into like the sense of sensing that creature has or can. And so it teaches how to almost like access its consciousness.
and embody its qualities, its gifts, its strengths. And so, yeah, this is a long video, but it's kind of like I can't just stop and start these things. Anyway, that's the way of communicating, ways of looking at nature as a therapeutic tool where you can interact with it in a way that it can transmit its wisdom and teachings direct through mimicking and imitating these creatures, holding the leaves and listening to the voice and the song and like actually looking at how a tree grows, and then actually feeling yourself as a crystal with these with physical stones, and not just looking at them as woo woo kind of pretty aesthetic things, but actually very ancient. Like all of them, no one kingdom's more superior than the other. They're all they're just different, and they're all relevant, and we need to have a relationship with each one.
Yeah, awesome. That was a bit of a deep dive, really, into different ways that we can connect with nature and ensuring that we're looking at nature through the lenses of these kingdoms is certainly a great way to do that. Thanks for the pointers, and yeah, something that I need to investigate more of. So, obviously, part of nature, and we've mentioned them one or two times here, are psychedelics. So, let's really open up the conversation to what is now a worldwide renaissance in this area. What's your experience with altered states or mind-altering substances, and what are you most passionate about?
The thing that I've invested the most amount of my time and resources and energy, and the thing that I'm most passionate about is psychedelics. And as a technology, as a therapeutic tool that has quite a kind of tarnished reputation that happened in generations before I was even here. And um, from I don't need to go into the history of it, but either way, there is just it has a quite a stigma, and so it makes it hard for and people don't even understand how much of how much of that the propaganda they've bought into, because it's just almost intergenerational. And like people saying that like, oh, I don't do drugs, I'd rather just do meditation, or and I was like, why? Like, don't you want to be the best person that you can be? Isn't that we're all I kind of think like that's what we're all trying to do. And so why eliminate tools that actually are quite potent and powerful in getting you to that place of authenticity and naturalness and freedom, and just like really like deep gratitude. Like, yes, do your practices as well, do your techniques, do your whatever, but like why not use technology that's like literally born out of the earth and is compatible with our neurology and biology in a way that it creates these like mind body boggling experiences that dissolve our fear of death, our like give us a felt experience of connectedness with reality. Like it's not something that is like intellectual or theoretical. It's like a like you fucking experience it. So like why do your either or kind of stuff? Why not go and so I kind of feel like of all the things that I like to train in things that work. And I have done some really kind of shit. I'm gonna cover up my microphone so hopefully it doesn't it's a bit windy where I am, but as you notice, I like doing things out in nature. Whoa. Um and what was I saying? I have put myself through some pretty kind of interesting situations. I do feel like a human guinea pig. I've done some really stupid shit in the name of, I wouldn't say science, but just kind of like human performance. And well, actually, the name of service is what it kind of comes down to. I think in the beginning it was the name of like feeling that I was broken and needing to fix myself, but and in time it becomes like I don't feel that about myself anymore, and it just feels like I'm doing it in the name of of service. But I kind of feel like before I go into, I'm gonna do a series of videos, but in a way, I feel like I'm just going to qualify myself for why I am an authority on these topics. And I think I've always held back from really kind of putting myself out there in this field, or not even in this field, just kind of like even mentioning that I talk about psychedelics because, what's the saying? It was Margaret Thatcher that was like, she said, if you have to tell people you're a woman, you're probably not one. Or maybe that was with being powerful. But either way, it's like, but I'm gonna explain why I'm an authority in the field of psychedelics. But to do that, I'm gonna put on my spectacles so that I'm perceived. Yes, and yes, they're prescription glasses. If people are kind of wondering, "Oh, I've never seen James wear glasses. They're prescription to be hipster cool and to be perceived as intelligent without me having to open my mouth. Um, but okay, so why am I um, an authority in the field of psychedelics? I kind of feel like because if you can't hear it in my voice, I'm super passionate about these. Not in an evangelistical way. I think when I first was exposed to them, I was a bit, but I do feel like they're not for everyone. But there are many people that would benefit from them that are choosing not to take them because of their stigma or just kind of the misinformation they've received about these substances. I spend a lot of my time going to these conferences, learning about these. So I have this kind of intellectual, scientific understanding of these substances as a result of absorbing and feeling the need that some people need this empirical information on the therapeutic nature of these substances because of they've been misinformed. So that's one element. I'm also experienced firsthand, as in like I put my body and my psyche and my um, a lot of things on my soul um, in 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 the line of these substances to like cultivate a relationship with these plant allies. Like I'm traditionally trained in the Shipibo lineage from South America, but I've also immersed in some Native Australian practices, but I've also immersed myself in um, Western psychotherapeutic kind of frames and systems and modalities as well. So I feel like I have this complementary approach. So there are certain plants and substances that I have more of a relationship with than others. The strongest ones would be the ayahuasca and certain species of acacias, Syrian rue, iboga, datura, psilocybin mushrooms, San Pedro cactus. I haven't done Amanita muscaria. It's there. Just I don't tend to do things until they kind of like it's an organic. I don't chase them out. They tend to come to me. And even when they come to me, it's like, I don't always just do it because the opportunity is there. Although some people think that I do, but I denied 5-MeO DMT toad medicine 5 times before I eventually had it. And for me, the frog and the toad represent or teach the message of patience. So I kind of felt like it was meaningful. And the toad rewarded me with that. So yeah, I have both the Eastern and Western approach, as well as the scientific understanding, as well as the actual firsthand experience. And I feel like I'm a living example of the potential and power of these medicines. Like although your interaction or what you perceive of me now is I seem somewhat functional and mature and I am in this kind of platform. I've still got refinement and but yeah, I feel like a credible kind of human being. Um, and I feel like it's the result of my kind of my soul's um, drive, but a huge part of it has been psychedelics. Like when I was younger, I was a very intense ice addict from the age of 15, and it that continued till my early 20s, until I went to South America and drank trained in the Shipibo lineage, and I mean I was self-aware enough to know that like my drug addiction, my ice smoking every day was not healthy for me, but I didn't have the will and discipline and the understanding and the yes strong enough to say no to these substances. And so I would remove myself from the environment and friendship circles, and I would go live in like the bottom of Australia, like in Tasmania for a couple of years, and then the central desert of Australia as a way of rehabbing myself. And which were also like I learned practical things, and I spent time with Indigenous, and I some cool things. It was all part of my journey, but it wasn't until I my first psychedelic I experienced was DMT, and it was given to me without really knowing what I was about to get into, and it was the first time in years that I'd been trying to stop taking crystal meth, and I just like each day I would set the intention of like I'm not gonna have it today, and I would fucking have it, and it was interesting. Like after having that, the next morning was the first morning I woke up without my first thought being, "Where's the pipe?" And it felt surreal to feel like, wow, I feel a sense of kind of connection and deep self-love that lasted for about a month, and it probably would have lasted longer, but I didn't understand the significance of community as an integration tool, and I was still surrounded by the drug taking friends that I had, and then I just got drunk one night and then had a pipe again, and it like literally fed the parasite in me that I feel that drug like it feeds a parasite in people, and you can see it. And I feel like that's partly why ayahuasca is so powerful, because it's antibacterial, antifungal, antiparasitic, and it literally cleanses the gut biome, which is where most of our behavior and thoughts and feelings and kind of memories are held. And so to have this like purgative effect that literally cleanses the gut flora of these fucked up parasites and pathogens. It's like, forget about the visions, the medicine, it's just, it's working. And so I didn't really, so yeah, I have firsthand experience. And it was as a result of my training that I came back and I was so porous. And when I say porous, I mean like malleable, like there was no filter. There was no barrier between me and trees and people and landscapes. And it was like, I mean, I'd lost 14 kilos, and I was kind of, I felt kind of not weak, but I felt weak, and overwhelmed, oversensitive. And so part of, not on a conscious level, but in hindsight, and it's what became a very essential key, was that my movement training and physical training to actually get physically strong, and that just indirectly created boundaries and barriers, and taught me how to, although there's other ways of learning boundaries, but I feel like then my training in the physical body and somatic processes offered this complementary perspective and insight into the nature, because I would have these endogenous psychedelic experiences, which means that I wouldn't take a substance, but I would have the very peak equivalent kind of thing just from breath and movement and sound and imagination all kind of coalescing together in this moment where I would like, if I hadn't had the training that I'd had, it would kind of, I'd be scared, just because of because they were epic experiences. So what else can I say? Yeah, I feel like they're the elements, they're the components that, or the points that I feel qualify me to give the videos that I'm going to give probably in the next week or so on, and the different kind of topics that I'll be talking about would be like personal, intergenerational, ecological trauma, and the psychedelic influence on epigenetics and how it relates to these traumas. harm reduction in festival settings, group work, the solo work, and the benefits of both, preparation and integration, how to lose your mind safely and what not to do, anti-addiction tools, endogenous versus exogenous psychedelic experiences. Why do I personally take these and what I receive from these substances? The skills necessary to be a competent facilitator, nature immersion as an integration approach, psychedelics as actual integration tools instead of actually having peak initiatory experiences. I'll go into that. The concept of what I call somodelics, which is what I'm giving a talk on at EGA this year, which is the feedback loop of psychedelics, not just the way dance and somatic processes augment the nature of the psychedelic behavior, but how psychedelics not just affect the brain, but the body. And also this is relevant to why I actually called my business after psychedelic dimethyltryptamine, although it was dynamic movement therapy, but it was just kind of a purposeful play on words, flotation tanks and psychedelics. So yeah, they're the kind of things that I'll be talking about in the next week. And these are the things that I'm most passionate about.
Well, certainly heaps to take in there, James. I'm going to have to listen to this again, really, to take in all of that. I think it's fantastic what you're doing there at the conference, bringing the body into the psychedelic therapy area. I think we need a lot more of that. There seems to be a lot of clinical research going on, which is obviously needed for a safety and risk analysis point of view. But in terms of therapeutic effectiveness, the body has to be on board. So great that you're pointing to that. Another area that seems, it's really hard to deal with integration within the psychedelic therapy space, at least the clinical space, because you really need the time, and time is money, especially when you're having to have a physician there, a psychotherapist, or a psychiatrist. So I wonder if you could touch on integration in general, your thoughts on it. What are your practices, and what can you share?
There's a lot to say. Well, first of all, I want to suggest, like for me, the way I look at psychedelics, more so the plants than the actual laboratory compounds, but I look at them as a food group, as a nutrient that, in the same way that the superfoods that you might eat that have aminos and proteins and adaptogenic kind of compounds in them that are quite slightly more evolved in their capacity to like read your nervous system and know whether it needs to be stimulated or depressed in some way. I feel like the entheogenic plants have developed these alkaloids and compounds that are quite, it's like if they're the superfoods, and these are the X-Men mutant foods, not mutants. let's just go with X-Men foods that have these really evolved, complex alkaloids and compounds that interact with our nervous system in ways that we don't really know, because there's a lot of laws that are preventing the research kind of to be done with these things. But what we do know is they make a lot of connections in the brain. And so I feel like the reason, like most indigenous cultures, except for the tribe up in the Inuits, like they didn't have access to psychedelic plants, and so they would get into altered states via drumming. But these plant compounds, they literally make connections in the brain. And when your brains and nervous systems connected, it also like usually it inhibits blood flow to particular areas that dilute the richness of reality that we could potentially be perceiving, because it'd just be like overwhelming. And so blood flow tends to like be restricted to those areas, but then connections are made throughout the internal networks. And so when we're feeling connected in our brain, we tend to feel connected to our environment. So I feel like the fact that these substances have been illegal, and and aren't interacted with as a nutrient, as a food group that should be there as a complete part of a balanced diet, of being a human being connected to reality and your ecosystem. Now I'm gonna probably not the next one, but yeah, the next one will probably be about the topic on the dangers and dark side of psychedelics, just because I don't want to be painting this picture that they're all kind of like love and light, because there are some real kind of pitfalls in this culture and community and these substances. Sorry, the battery just went dead. So yeah, nature as an integration tool, and I just kind of like wanted to kind of frame that's how I feel like a lot of the indigenous tribes would interact with, or just looked at these psychedelic substances, and that's how I look at them as a nutrient in food. But back to the nature as an integration tool. Nature is the kind of ultimate psychedelic. Like immersion in nature, like deep immersion, is a profoundly psychedelic experience. Whether it's the wilderness of the forests and the mountains and the deserts, or the ocean. But because I used to teach flow states and integration of altered experiences, and what I came to understand was that micro flow experiences integrate macro flow experiences, and so microdosing in nature, which is what you're doing, especially like when I go for a run, as well as like playing with my sense of focus and zooming in and out. It's like I'm constantly touching trees and I'm constantly touching leaves and just basically getting microdosed of the tiny little microorganisms that are kind of like bleeding into my skin. And I feel like that's why most people are ill and diseases, because they don't have the diversity in their microbiome, which is part of the skin. So microdosing in nature. So yeah, I recently did, as a way of recovering from a failed experiment. On the topic of experiments, the dark goggles. Like I didn't get any sleep at all the next night. Like my circadian rhythms were fucked, and it like I mean I've had worse things happen than just having my circadian rhythms fucked. But yeah. It's just some of the collateral damage that happens when I kind of put my body and psyche into certain altered states. So in one of like 6 months ago, 5 months ago, as a way of recovering from another previous experience that I'll probably do a separate video on, what happened? I was sitting on the beach, quite broken, in the sense of like I really fucked up. And I understood this like micro flow. Like I felt like I needed to do like little things to get back into it. And confronting or interacting with my fears is the best way to get into like these little micro processes. And I'm looking out at the ocean and I realize that I'm like actually afraid of. I've always been afraid of the ocean. Like it's a fear not in a humbling way of respect, but of like I feel incompetent in that. Even though I was a state swimmer as a kid, I felt like whenever I would go into the ocean, I wouldn't venture any further away from the shore where I could actually touch the floor with my feet. And so it was a combination of like my incompetence and the overwhelming or the whelming kind of power of it. And so I was like, I got to deal with this, because one of the things that I like to do is or have done is like use my fears as a compass. And when I do that, it almost like opens up an entirely new ecosystem to explore in life. And so I have many ecosystems that I've approached purely because I was I had a tension and an anxiety and a fear around it. And I was like, well, I got to explore that. I got to understand why, what is that? And they've in most cases have at least provided really good stories, but like just yeah, they've opened up just a spectrum of life that was almost like a closed door previously. So I did this, and I was like, what about I'm afraid of the ocean. I'm going to do this 3-day watermanship course, which was basically a freediving course that initially when I used to teach flow states and integration of altered states, one of the like larger plans that I had was like learning how to to develop a relationship with each element. With air, I did a skydiving course and jumped out of a plane for the first time without doing tandem. And then my theory was like, oh, and I'll do like freediving and whatever to get into to water, and then rock climbing and just mountaineering for earth. And then I was like tantra and sex or salsa was fire. But this was like something, an idea that I had a few years ago. Pardon me. And anyway, I did this, and it was a 3-day course, and that ended out at Julian Rocks, which is considered to be the most kind of like the birthplace of the Dreamtime for the indigenous around here. It's the most eastern point of Australia, and the Dreamtime for them kind of like begins on the east coast and travels around the globe. And geologically, it's 300 million years older than any other rock around Australia or of Australia. And so I think that's pretty cool. But went out there and did a 15-minute depth dive, and when I kind of came out, I was like, it reminded me of a conversation that I had with a carer and guardian of mine when I was 14, when I was leaving him, and he was like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I'm like, dude, that's like a lot of pressure to put on a 14, 13-year-old. I'm like, I don't know. I'm not one of those kids that knows. And but he was like, just what? And I was like, my answer was to be a great white shark cave diving instructor. And not to say that you need to do if you want to be a fireman, that you need to be a fireman when you grow up, but it felt like a thing that I wanted to do, that where I wasn't, even though there was an element of service in there, like education and getting people to understand these magical creatures, but it wasn't like I want to change the world, or that I'm like needing to be validated and or just kind of that I was reacting to like the therapeutic culture that I was so immersed in. And so it felt like a place of innocence and purity. And so I'm kind of slightly entertaining that. But what I came to look at afterwards, I was looking at the ocean as the psychedelic of psychedelics in the way that people interact with it as well. It's like in the same way that psychedelics, the poisons in the dosage, in the sense that the same compound will completely change its behavior depending on the amount, the dosage. And so in the same way that people interact with the ocean, in the same way, like some people, it's like the British people, they just get their feet wet. Some people don't even get their feet wet. They just like sit on the beach and sunbake, and there's no judgment. That's all cool. But then some people will kind of like body surf, and then some people will actually surf, and then some people will kind of go snorkeling and scuba diving and then being towed onto big waves, and then being dumped out at sea, and it's like they're all the different spectrums of interacting with that ecosystem, and that they all achieve different things, and they all need various types of training. So it's like if you're going to go out just for surfing as an example, you wouldn't just like before you hopped out on a board, you would practice the techniques and the skills on land and get the muscle memory familiar with that before you're actually having to deal with the complicated kind of navigation of a wobbly kind of board, of a wobbly wave. And I feel like in a way, I'm going to probably do a talk on some of the ways to prepare for psychedelic states and being dumped. Because because part of the training was actually being like a simulated wipeout where you're having to like not just practice your pranayama yoga breathing, but actually kind of performance breathing where you're just staying relaxed. And it felt like, wow, this training is if I had learned this training before I went to Peru, or was like when I was in Peru, it was like the ideal type of training to navigate ayahuasca ceremonies and peak kind of overdoses of psychedelic experiences and even micro experiences. So I'm now kind of training up as a freediving instructor as a way to kind of like practically get people back into the environment, but as a way of like, once they've had these like peak psychedelic experiences, as a way of integrating. And so, okay, so where am I going with this? So why does nature act as a integration tool? Because it's like it's immersive, like especially the oceans, like you get in there and you submerge yourself underwater and you're having to like it's cultivating presence and awareness of your internal physical body, but then also your kind of relational sense. But the atmosphere changes and you're dealing with like pressure in the way that pressure can happen in the psychedelic space. And it's like rich in colors and there's little fucking creatures. There's like aliens and beings that are fucking like aliens. That's okay, but why is it an integration tool? Because it's like when we have a psychedelic experience, you go from like perceiving the 50% or the 2,000 bits of data per second that our nervous system's processing of a potential, I think it's like 400 billion bits of data that they say science is now saying, but the figure continues to grow. And I feel like it'll continue to grow. But it's like when you take something and it might just last 15, like 12 hours or 8 hours or 4 hours, but it's like it's in the system for weeks and months. And so you might have this like peak opening, but then there's still a level of sensitivity and enhanced awareness in that space. So immersing yourself in nature after psychedelic experiences, not only does it like amalgamate the fluctuating data that's sitting in the bioenergetic field, in your bioenergetic field, and it amalgamates it from data into information, into functional patterns and wisdom, but it's also beautiful. Aesthetically, it's beautiful. So you just focusing on something that is organically beautiful is going to entrain your nervous system to organize itself in a beautiful way too. So it's simple. It's like it's complex. Nature's complex, and so it's like when you're overwhelmed with life, just focus on the beauty of nature and insights will happen and simplicity will arise. And it's like so there's that reason. There's also there's something else in that of like when you open yourself up to this spectrum of reality. So our senses and our five, they only perceive we're only perceiving 1% of the spectrum of light and 1% of the acoustic spectrum. And then when you take these substances, it opens them up. The figures vary, but it's like 40 to 50. And when you have like a non-dual experience, you might be dealing with the entire electromagnetic spectrum. And so kind of coming back from that is you want to be really gentle, and you're also going to be more sensitive to your surroundings. So if you're like inside and watching TV and in these like inorganic structures that collapse the fractal harmonic wavelength of a particular atmosphere, does that make sense? Like I'll provide a link to that so that's a bit more relevant. But like when you're in a organic field, the little waves fit into the big waves, so there's like fractal compression, which just feels good. And when you're in an inorganic atmosphere that is like made of inorganic material and isn't proportioned according to golden mean and sacred geometry, it's or the Fibonacci ratio, it creates like it basically the little waves collapse one another, and so it just doesn't feel nice. So nature, the harmonics of nature, almost like allow the nervous system to just consolidate everything that's just floating around. There was something else that I was going to say regarding that. Blah 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 blah. Oh, being in nature just promotes movement. And so movement is an integration tool. And it doesn't have to be kind of really complex movements, just walking, just gentle walking. But like the beautiful thing about swimming is it's like this full kind of three-dimensional immersion that's usually spiraling. And so it's the spirals of the body that kind of like create, it does a lot of things. I think that's a separate talk that I want to go into, but just being in nature promotes movement, and then movement also movement then integrates psychedelic experiences. So I think that's about it. Can I like go into anything else? Maybe also the Schumann resonance. So the Schumann resonance is a frequency that the earth emits, which used to be at 7.34 hertz, which was the hertz of the theta state. But just recently on the 28th of January, it jumped up into a gamma range, which is the state, the frequency of unity consciousness, and like it just makes more connections in the brain. And so basically allowing your feet to feel connected to the earth, and then but sitting in it and immersing in that will kind of retrain the brain and nervous system to get into a state that will amalgamate peak kind of macro flow psychedelic experiences.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's some really practical ways there to integrate after psychedelic experiences or in general when you wake up in the morning. I've had a number of Qigong masters tell me it's as simple as getting out onto wet grass with bare feet and connecting to the earth. And I certainly try and do that as often as possible. And something we haven't talked about today, actually, I don't think we're going to get time for it, is barefoot existence in general. I know you're a massive advocate of it, and something that we talked about very early on in our relationship. So that hasn't been mentioned, and we'll have to do a whole separate podcast on that one. Let's look at that later. We can't talk about all the things. However, we can talk about personal development, or I know you and I prefer to use the term personal inquiry, based on some of our teachers' thoughts and non-impositional teaching. I do wonder what you feel we've missed in the personal development field. Like, yeah, what are some of the problems we are experiencing in this personal development area?
So one of the main communities that I've been a part of in Melbourne is over the past 7 years is the personal development community. Now that kind of like is an umbrella for a lot of other sub groups, but I'm kind of like generalizing and kind of putting them all together. And like anyway, I've been a part of that, and I've also been very distant because I saw that there was like some frustrations that I had, and so I went out and I developed those qualities myself. And so the main reason I focus myself as a movement teacher is because there's not enough kind of like movement teachers out there, and it's such an important kind of aspect of personal development that permeates through every other area of your life. And what I witnessed from people's experiences is like they would go see a practitioner in whatever they were trying to grow or heal or fix within themselves. And it was almost like the practitioner would store a software program into their kind of like operating system. And a lot of people would have healing crises, like a meltdown, where they would feel shit for hours, and we're told, oh, it's part of the process. It's part of you're integrating. And yes and no. Like, yes, there's need for integration, but those type of experiences can be like eliminated. It just, like, I don't understand how people don't comprehend, or practitioners don't comprehend, that if you're trying to install some sort of iPhone app onto an old shitty old school Nokia, there's going to be some like it's actually not going to work. There's going to be some pretty problematic symptoms that arise. So if you're going to be installing Windows 2015, you may want to actually address the hardware, which is the physical body, and develop that to basically be able to play and operate the software program that these practitioners are installing into people. And so, yeah, basically what dynamic movement therapy is a way of really upgrading your hardware, as well as upgrading your software upgrading your operating system, as well as the hardware and the software. I'm not really a computer person, so hopefully that makes sense. But it's like, yeah, if you really want to eliminate healing crisis, and meltdowns, and having practitioners telling you, oh, you're just integrating. It's like, well, there's ways of really accelerating and shortcutting the integration process, and that is like complementary practices to develop the whole system self.
I think that's a really great message for us in terms of looking at the whole system self. I think that's a great term, and ensuring that the experiences we're going to, whether it's a workshop or a teaching or an immersion, is looking at the whole body, not just sort of pushing down a particular route and then expecting you to integrate that back into your life afterwards, as you do in your workshops, really bringing the whole system along for the ride and gently bringing it to a close so that you can walk out of there and feel like you've done all your processing, you've done all your integration within the container of that workshop, and that people are, healthy, safe, and active, ready to go back home and into their lives, maybe after a good sleep, of course. So, look, finally, it is Christmas soon here in Australia, or at least my little daughter is reminding me of how many months we have to go to that. I wonder, have you got any messages for us at this time of year? And yeah, what's your perspective on the whole Christmas thing?
So yeah, on the topic, like just the timing of Christmas, I kind of feel like the Santa Claus lie actually has really fucking profound psychological effects on kids and also adults, and the sense of disenchantment they have of unseen forces in life and just magical myths. And because it's like, imagine, like, for the first few years you've been told by these adults that you trust that, like, Santa Claus is real, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh no, sorry, Santa Claus, we've been lying to you all this time, it's not real. Even though there is an origin story to it, which I'll get to, but it's like, that's the first time the child's been like, wow, what else have you been lying to me? And usually Santa Claus goes along with like fairies and elementals and other magical creatures, which are all there, and you get to experience them when you're in altered states, but there's no way of proving that they exist, so we just tend to be like, oh, they don't exist. And they're all make believe. And so it's like that gets all kind of like sucked down the plug, the bath plug, the drain, when the child's like, oh yeah, no, it's like Santa Claus isn't real. And I feel like it just kills magic in children and in adults. And so, yeah, I think, anyway, the origin story of Christmas, I used to deliver Christmas trees many years ago, and it'd be like a 3-week thing where I'd like fill up the van with like 40 trees, and I was working for a company I was contracting, and would then deliver it to their houses and set it up. So I'd like set up a base and like screw the bolts in and then water it because it's still alive in a lounge room, and so it just drinks a lot of nutrient. And whilst I was there, it'd take like 15 or 20 minutes. I would like basically educate them on the shamanic origin stories of Christmas and the tree and Santa Claus, and which involves Amanita muscari mushroom and which is a psychoactive fungi, and then I would like most people were like blown away by it. They're like, "Wow, that's the best story I've ever heard. That's going to be the story that I'm going to share with people over Christmas lunch." And then I ended up telling my boss, I was like, "Oh, so this is the story," and I'm like, I've been telling people this. As he's like, "Wow, man, that's an amazing story. I never knew." It's like, and I was like, "Yeah, I've been telling customers about this every time I serve it up." It's like, "You can't do that. Can't talk about illegal drugs with customers." And I was like, "I just told you the story, and you said it was like really meaningful and relevant." And so I was like, I just said yes. I was like, "All right, I won't tell people because I'm like, if you don't get it, because when I've already explained it to you, you're not going to get it." So I was just like, I said yes with every intention of still um, still teaching, educating people, and adding meaning to my work because I didn't feel like it was harming anyone and or his business. And so I kept on doing it. And then like a week later, he calls me up and he was like, "Hey man, are you still telling people about that story?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Keep doing it." I was like, "Why?" He's like, "Well, 3 people have called up in the past 24 hours, just kind of like raving about your customer service and and you said that you told them this like really meaningful story." Um, and so, dude, yeah, it's working. Keep doing it. Um, so what is the story? Basically, it goes back, and I'll provide some links. So like, I would check this out. There's a few documentaries on it that go for hours, but a summary is that back in Siberia, the during the solstice they would have celebrations with certain sacraments, and their local witch doctor was like the shepherd who was the reindeer herder, and he would herd reindeers, and reindeers have this innate ability, like similar to the way pigs can find truffles in the dirt, is like they can sniff the Amanita muscari, which are the red and white spotted mushrooms in the snow, and so they would kind of like dig them up, and then the shepherd would collect them and put them in his sack, and then because it was snowing, a lot of the yurts would be like fully encapsulated with snow, so you couldn't get through in um, the front video. I mean, not front video, the front door. And so they would come through the chimney he would come through the chimney at the top of um, the yurts, which is kind of like where the chimney idea comes from. Now, he was also, because he was in a relationship with the Amanita muscari mushroom, this red and white, he would wear this red and white spotted cape or hood. And so he would come down with a cloak, with a sack, and the sack was full of these mushrooms. And so there's a variety of different versions of this. Like um, it was either the reindeers would eat the Amanita muscaria mushrooms, and then their liver would process the toxin that's found in this mushroom, and so they would drink the urine. That's one version. The other version, and so they would get high, kind of like a wine, because it would retain the psychoactive properties of it, but not all the toxins. The second version is that the shaman character, witch doctor character, would drink or would eat the mushrooms, but because he had a relationship and a physical kind of mastery, his liver would process the toxins, and then they would drink his urine. Or the other version is that they would they would have like a little pine tree in the yurt, kind of like a clothesline, to dry their items. And so they would basically hang the Amanita muscaria mushrooms on the Christmas tree, very similar to what the Christmas ornaments look like these days. And so this at a certain distance from the fire, the heat would basically break down the toxins of the mushroom, yet still, and in the same way that heat activates the THC of the cannabis, the heat would basically activate the psychoactive component of the Amanita muscaria mushroom. And so they would then eat these curated, dehydrated mushrooms, and on the solstice, and they would trip balls. Like they would have divine experiences with reality and life, and imagine like you're in your yurt because it's freezing outside, and you're having this mushroom, and then above you you're kind of like the reindeer walking up on the snow. You can definitely see how they would think, oh, reindeers are flying here, and the whole myth of flying reindeers comes from. And so yeah, that whole kind of pagan ritual, which was kind of stolen from the indigenous, and there are further kind of claims that it was this particular Amanita muscaria mushroom that was used in church as the Eucharist, as the wafer, as the basically the body of Christ. And so you would imagine that like people would come to a church, which in itself is a generator that can create altered states and give you access to altered reality and source, with devotional prayer. That also is a technology that can be used to do that as well. And then you have this psychoactive substance that now people, they weren't being told that they were being given this, but they were being given it, and and then that would give them either a celestial, like heaven experience, or a hell experience. And so they would then be like, okay, if you don't want to go to heaven, if you want to go to heaven, then give us donation, and we'll make sure that you get there. And if you had a hell experience, that was hell. If you want to avoid that, give us your money, and we will guarantee that. So that was a way of like giving people a real felt experience. Now, the difference between the shamanic cultures was that they were being told they were given something that was psychoactive that came from the earth, and then it was like the earth was like there was no need for mediation, or it was like there was just a reverence and an acknowledgement and a deep love for the earth and the medicine that it provided. Whereas now that technology is being stolen and was yeah, so that's been like and replaced with like now they don't need to do it, they just use fear, guilt, and kind of dogma.
Yeah, keeping it real as we wrap up this lengthy podcast. Thank you so much for your time here. And I wonder, well, I wonder two things actually. I wonder, could you please play us some Didj to finish, perhaps after this final question? And I just wonder whether you have any final words for our audience today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope to see you soon.
Okay, I've gone off. I'm going to keep this to 5 minutes. This is my way of communicating with the public, because apparently my Facebook social media attempts apparently are obnoxious and arrogant. And they're coming from people that know me. They're just like, you sound like a different person. And I think it's because I'm clumsy. I feel clumsy articulating myself using words. I mean, using written communication. And so I need to get a kind of tripod. I'll have a tripod in the future, but at the moment I could get one of those selfie sticks or not. They're the things that interest me. They're the things that I've been developing skills. I've been developing skills to develop that. I've been learning skills to develop myself as a full spectrum individual, and I like sharing that. But yeah, I'm having difficulty. I'm having difficulty communicating that via Facebook. So I'm gonna do it. And I go to some pretty cool spots around Australia. So I'll take you there, and like you'll get to hear, like, can you hear that? The beep, 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 beep. I've been here for 4 or 5 days now, and 4 of those days of being naked in the sun without eating any food, and just hearing that and hearing the rhythm. But if you are listening to this, then I'm going through with it, and I'm kind of sharing myself, and I'll be trying to communicate with you people. I don't know if it's going to be 3 minutes or 5 minutes, depending on your attention span. I'll look that up when I get out into the civilization in a few days. What do I fucking say? Laters? Share this message and like, and you know what? Do whatever you want. Bye. Whoa.